coming. My name is Pearl Bransford. I'm currently the president of the Sister Cities of Franklin and Williamson County organization. I'm so fortunate to have several board members here today. Let's see, Cheryl Wilson, please stand. Sarah Light, who you're going to be hearing from a little later. Mike Thompson is here. He serves on the board of Sister Cities of Franklin and Williamson County. Sarah has put together a little quickie video that you're going to show a little bit more about our organization. But first thing, just want to make sure you understand that you realize that we appreciate you being here because there's a lot of choices here in Williamson County and Franklin, things that you can be doing on a Sunday evening besides watching football or putting your feet up and rest for the week. But this is very enlightening, and we always want to share and build relationships and inspire people. We are an international organization. We promote building bridges, and we look forward to a wonderful program today. Thank you all again. I will have Sarah Light come to the podium. She is in charge of our Passport to America series, and turn it over to her. To the world. Okay. Miss Sarah.
Well, you know, I realize that sometimes when I come to these passport programs, we have them, that there's people who don't even know what Sister Cities is. So I prepared just a very quick little visual presentation of what Sister Cities is, and then we will get to the main event, which is going to be very exciting. I'm so glad you're all here. Yeah. Sister Cities of Franklin and Williamson County. So a lot of people don't even know that we have sister cities, and we do. We currently have 3. We have one in Carleton Place, Canada, one in County Laois, Ireland, and one in Bad Soden, Germany. Am I pronouncing it right? Bad Soden, Germany. We have people from Frankfurt. All of these little cities are very similar to Franklin, you know, and what we try to do is the mission of Sister Cities, to build global relationships, share cultural and educational experiences, and inspire economic growth for our community, so that when we're connecting with these sister cities, that's how we do it. And the way that we do it is through these wonderful youth exchanges. Right now we do back and forth homes exchanges with Germany and Canada. The high school kids come to us and we go to them, and they stay at each other's houses. And if you know anyone who, you know, make sure you talk to, is there anyone here on the board who they can talk to about that right now? Mike, back there. So if you have a high schooler that you think might want to do an exchange, Mike would be a good person to talk to. We do Passport to the World, obviously. We do a Celebration of Nations festival that just happened in October. And you bet you didn't know that that great pumpkin from Pumpkin Fest comes from our sister city, Carleton Place, Canada. 1,000-pound something pumpkin. They bring it down here so it can sit in downtown Franklin. And with that, I just wanted to let you know what's going on. If you have any questions about Sister Cities, come see one of the board members and we will talk to you about it. So today we have a special program in honor of National Native American Heritage Month, the month of November. And we have a special guest, Charles Robinson, who's an educator. He goes around the country doing this kind of thing. He has an amazing family that you're going to see some of that help him. And wait, there was one more thing I was going to say, Charles, but I'm not sure it is. But we're going to leave the program to him. And we also have some snacks. Help yourself to some candy corn. I see some of you have already done that. So are you ready?
Ready.
Okay. Charles.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I am going to, I'll do like this. Wait. Now I look real official here. I've got two laptops up here. Look like I know what I'm talking about. Well, I want to say thank you for being here. Like Ms. Pearl mentioned, there's lots of things you can be doing on a Sunday afternoon, especially a day like today. It'd be good to be taking a nap about right now. And with 8 kids, I need those often. I'm Charles Robinson. I'm from the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. I've been here in Middle Tennessee about 21 years. So in Nashville terms, that makes me a local, right? After so much time, you're a regular here. And been here in Franklin probably about 18 of those years. And it really, truly is an honor to be here. I mentioned that I'm from the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma. My mother is Scottish. And so growing up, I'm Choctaw on my dad's side, Scottish on my mom's side. It was great growing up because I could play cowboys and Indians all by myself. And I often did. And so we grew up in Texas, went to college in Oklahoma, traveled around trying to make a lot of money after college, right? Pursuing the dollar, pursuing this lifestyle that I thought I wanted. Then moved to Nashville. Actually, I kind of landed here by default. I was driving from Michigan back to Texas, and my car broke down in Nashville, and I just never really left. But what I found out, I worked for Glenn Campbell, the late Glenn Campbell, for 5 years, a very dear man, dear friend. But being in the music industry and watching people pursue their dreams and passions, whether it be singing or songwriting or whatever it might be, it got me to really ask the hard question to myself is, what is it that I'm passionate about? What moves me? What thing do I wake up every morning to say, this is what I want to do today? And in the process of trying to figure that out, I took a trip to Pakistan, drove through the Peshawar, then drove through the Khyber Pass into Kabul, Afghanistan. And during this time, it was right after 9/11, and began to experience a lot of real life issues with people that were didn't look like me, talk like me, and began to see a lot of needs and began to ask God, is this what you're calling me to do? Are you calling me to address the needs and the hurts of people outside of Tennessee or outside the United States? And I felt like God speak to me in my spirit and say, no, I've called you to your native people. And so shortly thereafter, I left the company I was working with and began to pursue my passion, which is educating people on our Native American people. Educating people and teaching people what it means to be Native American and some of our history. Now, I have here with me 3 of my children. This is Maya, wave at Maya. Then there's Ayanli. And then there's Tushke, my youngest son. And you'll notice Tushke's hair is quite long. His braid goes down below his belt. And in our native way, we don't cut our hair unless it's a time of grieving or mourning. And so he's never had his hair cut. Me, I started growing mine later in life, and as often is the case, it kind of reaches a certain point and it kind of stops growing. And I'm not sure why that is, although I seem to be growing in a lot of other areas. My hair is not one of those areas I'm growing in. And then I have 2 others that are going to be sharing some dancing with you guys in just a little bit. Then I have a few more kids at home and one in college out in California, so I've got them all over the place. My wife is Lakota and Blackfoot. She's born on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota, was raised on her mother's reservation in Canada. I mentioned we have 8 kids. We have them all they're all miracles, all of them. You know, God gave us 4 of our children by the miracle of birth. He gave us the 4 others by miracle of adoption. And each time we've gotten a child, it's been a great blessing. And we've had other children come from reservations that would be in our home for a period of time until their families got healthy enough to bring them back home. And so my wife and I have always said our desire is to reach out to our native communities, and however God would bring us children, that's how we would take them. But God has a sense of humor. So one of the children that we got in one time, her last name was Black Spotted Horse. That's her last name, Black Spotted Horse. My oldest daughter, who's in college at USC out in California, Her last name is Dodging Horse. Dodging Horse. And I know God has a sense of humor because my wife's original family name owns different horses. And so we've got all these horses coming into our family. And it's unique in our native way because long ago, our native people, we may have a name change 3 or 4 times throughout the course of our life based on various things that might take place in your life. If your Old Testament scholars, you know when Abram name was changed to Abraham, or in the New Testament was Paul was named to Saul, or Saul became Paul. Different events in your lives may cause you to have a name change. And so that's always been the way. Now, when we began to sign on with the U.S. government, we began to be issued last names. And so you may have had only the last name of Bull Shields, one of my wife's ancestors. But when they signed on with the government, they took their one name, made that their last name, and gave them a first name attached to that. And so some people have these really cool names, like we know a guy whose last name is Shot on both sides. We know somebody whose name is Screams in the Bushes. Mary Lou Big Canoe, that's one of my favorites. But my family, we came from Mississippi and Oklahoma in the 1830s, and we were given the last name of Robinson. Not real creative, but that's what we were given. But that's how it is in our native communities, even today. But one of the things I want to share with you guys, and the question I have for you is that what is the difference between a sunrise and a sunset? A sunrise and a sunset. Anybody know what the difference might be? You want to take a stab at it? Well, I would suggest to you that the only difference between a sunrise and a sunset is your perspective. The sun's in the same place in the sky, the earth's in the same place in its rotation, but depending on your perspective, it's a sunrise, it's a sunset, or it's somewhere in between, right? And so many times what we have to do is to try and understand the challenges of another people group or another person, is to try and look at life from their perspective. It's like these culturally tinted sunglasses that we put on. Now, if I was to pass out a pair of blue sunglasses to everybody in here, blue tinted sunglasses, and you look through those, everything's going to have a blue tint to it. And if I gave those glasses with yellow lenses that have a yellow tint, red lenses have a red tint, etc. Well, our life experiences tint the way we look at the world. If you're male, if you're female, if you're black, white, native, Asian, whatever it is, your life experience. If you grew up in a wealthy family, a very poor family, if you grew up in an abusive household or a loving household, you know, I think of some friends growing up and people I've talked to that said, grew up in a particular area back in Texas. Now I'm 51, and so at the time when I was growing up, some of my friends, the families were all married. And I was one of the first people they knew that had a divorced family. My parents divorced when I was in second grade. But I remember thinking, the way I see life is altogether different than the way they see life, because I'm seeing life from how a strong woman raises 3 sons on her own. And they had we're seeing life from how a family that's well-adjusted family, seemingly well-adjusted from the outside, right? But it's all these different tinted sunglasses that we look at life through. So my goal today is to have you guys catch a glimpse of our Native American people and our culture. So we're going to throw on some red tinted sunglasses for you and see life as if you're walking the red road, which is what we call living a traditional Native American lifestyle. And to Native people, the red road means to live life in a traditional red man's way, where you respect yourself, respect others, you respect all of creation, but there's a worship for the Creator, and that's what it means to be on the red road. My wife and I, we do ministry work on Native American reservations, so to us, the red road also represents that bloodstained road that led Jesus to the cross. And so, as I share some of these things with you today, For many of you, it's going to be some new information. For some of you guys, you've heard some of this stuff before. Now, a few years back, probably about 10 years ago now, give or take a few, I went to a school board meeting. Actually, I went to, what do you call the head of the school district? But it's right here in Williamson County. Superintendent, thank you. That's a word I just couldn't think of this morning. And I talked to him and I said, I'd like to see about going into schools and doing these Native American presentations. Now, you'll see a lot of stuff on the table over here, and that's many of the items that we'll show and we'll talk about in the schools. And I'd gotten into some schools, but I couldn't understand why there was no budget for a Native American cultural presentation in the schools. When there'd be a budget for this or this or this or this, but when it came to Native Americans, well, we don't really have that in our budget. And so I said, well, I want to visit with you guys. So I talked to the superintendent. He let me go. He's having a meeting with all the principals of the elementary schools in Williamson County. And he said, I'll give you 5 minutes in there. I said, okay. So I walk in all these principals, and I passed out a little quiz for them. And then this quiz had a few questions like, how many tribes are there in the United States today? Where did Christopher Columbus land when it came to America? How many tribal languages are spoken in the United States today? Those are some of the questions I asked. And I didn't really want to embarrass anybody, but also I didn't want to let them off the hook. And so I said, somebody raise your hand out. I had them fill out their little quiz. There's like 5 or 6 questions on there. And I said, how many tribes are there in the United States today? And I sat there and I didn't say a word because I wanted people to see if they knew. And nobody wanted to really say so. No, come on, tell me, somebody. Somebody said 50. Somebody said 25. And somebody said, no, there's more than that. There's almost 100. I said, you know what? There are 567 federally recognized tribes in the United States today. There's about 300 tribal languages still spoken in the United States today. And this is what I was telling the principals. I said, where did Christopher Columbus come when he landed in America? One of the principals said Plymouth Harbor. And I thought, okay. Then somebody else said down in Florida. And I said, you know that Christopher Columbus never stepped foot on what we know as the United States today. Never stepped foot on this dirt that we call America today. I said, so if you guys as principals of the schools do not know these things, what makes you think your teacher's going to know them, and what makes you think the children are going to learn them? And so my goal through all of that is to challenge people. And then shortly thereafter, I started getting into all the schools, elementary schools in Franklin, which I was thankful for. And so we still hit a lot of those schools, still do a lot of these things. But in America, there's a long history of racism against our native people. And I mean, I'm not, pulling the curtain back on anything you guys haven't already seen behind, because we understand that. That's been a part of our culture, the American culture. But what is interesting to me is about how little of that specifically is recognized today. So kind of what I think about when I was preparing some of the notes for this, one of the things my kids and I do when they're little, they're still little, but Nanaya, one of the ones who'll be dancing today, every time I sit down to read a storybook, or we'd make up stories, we'd be in bed at night and we'd make up stories as we go. But when I would read the stories early on, even if it didn't say it at the beginning of the book, we'd always start off with once upon a time, right? Once upon a time. So when we began to make up the stories and she would tell a story, she couldn't say once upon a time, she'd say wubba wubba time. And so as I was preparing some of this stuff about the history of Thanksgiving, I started saying, maybe we should title this talk Wubba Wubba Time. Because so much of what I share with you today It's stuff that people just don't know. And that is not that people had bad intentions about not revealing it. It's just historical stuff that people just don't really know. Because too many times we just jump on whatever's on the front page and we take that as the gospel. And so, but a couple of quotes I want to share with you guys. So one particular person, and again, this is, and I understand this is a different period of time and people's view of natives or of people of African heritage or of people of Irish heritage or whatever it be. Their views of all that were different when the immigrants were first coming over. I understand all that. But we're still humans. So this one individual in particular, he was a general, and he said this regarding an attack on the Iroquois tribes, the nation. He said to lay waste to all the settlements around, that the country may not merely be that the Iroquois nation may not merely be overrun, but destroyed. And then he went on to say, comparing Native Americans to wolves. He said, both being beasts of prey, though they differ in shape. And then upon his troops' behavior following a victory in battle, he said that they should skin the bodies of the Iroquois from the hips downward to make boot tops or leggings. That was George Washington. Another guy said that should any Indians resist against America stealing Indian lands, the Indian resistance must be met with the hatchet. And if ever we are constrained to lift the hatchet against any tribe, we will never lay it down till that tribe is exterminated or is driven beyond the Mississippi. That was Thomas Jefferson in 1807. I don't go so far as to say that only good Indians are dead Indians, but I believe 9 out of every 10 are, and I shouldn't like to inquire too closely into the case of the 10th. That was Theodore Roosevelt in 1886. And then referring to Sitting Bull, who was a great Lakota leader, said with his when he was killed, said with his fall, the nobility of the redskin is extinguished, and what few are left are a pack of whining curs who lick the hand that smites them. The best safety of the frontier settlements will be secured by the total annihilation of the few remaining Indians. Better they die than live the miserable wretches that they are. And then after the Battle of Wounded Knee in 1890, he said, in order to protect our civilization, we should follow it up with one more wrong and wipe these untamed and untamable creatures from the face of the earth. That was a guy named Frank Baum, who was the author of The Wizard of Oz. So our American history is filled with people who said some pretty nasty things about tribal people. And so many of our laws and many of the stuff that our history books have been written through those lenses. In the mid-1800s, when we began to be put on reservations, and we began to be forced, our children began to be forced into boarding schools, or in Canada they call them residential schools. And in these boarding schools, the kids, and the first thing they'd do is they'd cut our hair. And then they'd take us out of all of our tribal clothing and put us in, whatever the uniform was of the day. We were not allowed to speak our languages. There's very little oversight. These boarding schools are run by churches or denominations. Some of them are run by the government, all financed by the governments. But Native kids as young as 4 and 5 years old were forced into these boarding schools. My dad went to one. My mother-in-law went to one. My mother-in-law, she tells the story when she was in the boarding school. And now Blackfoot was the language she spoke, and it was her first language. She had to learn English later. But she was in one of these schools, and she was a young child at this point. She'd been in a few years, so she's probably 6 or 7 years old. And there's another little Blackfoot child that come into the boarding school who didn't speak English. And she was in the boarding school for almost a month. and she would not learn English, they said. And so to make an example out of her, what they did is they brought this little girl in front of the class. All the students stood like at the cafeteria, held her tongue out, took a sewing needle, pierced her tongue with a sewing needle, and said, "This is what happens if you speak your tribal language. You cannot speak your language anymore." And that was just back in the 50s. That wasn't that long ago. And so what we had is tribal people, children, being forcibly removed from their families into these boarding schools, growing up in these institutions. When they get of age, they leave the reservation, or they leave the boarding schools, go back to their communities. They go back to their communities, find a husband, find a wife. They have children. Their children are removed into these schools. That same system over and over again. The boarding school system really took off in the late 1880s, 1890s. The last one closed in 1985. So it is not that long ago. There's a lot of abuse that took place in these schools, lots of abuse. We didn't have the luxury today or back then of understanding post-traumatic stress disorder and understanding how to deal with people who've endured this kind of trauma. So what happened was actually the United States government still has not openly accepted responsibility for their role in these boarding schools. The Canadian government has. But what the Canadian government did is they had to have all the tribal people who had attended these schools, they had to meet with a lawyer and document when they were in schools. They had to be able to prove the time frame in schools. And if they were sexually abused or physically abused, they had to try and prove that as well. And to many of these people, what they were doing is they building up a case that then they would get compensated for time spent in the boarding schools. It wasn't a lot of money. You know, they would get the compensation up in Canada was $10,000 to prove you went to the schools, then $3,000 per year that you were at the schools. And so what they had to do, what they realized is that after people would begin talking about these things, for many people, and many of them maybe were 60, 70, 80 years old, was the first time they'd ever talked about this abuse that had happened to them when they were young children. But now they're overcome, they're flooded with these emotions of all this stuff that happened to them that they had suppressed for 50, 60, 70 years. Then they began to see a lot of these elderly people committing suicide because now they didn't know how to deal with all of this pain that was coming at them, coming out of them. And so when understanding about the trauma now, and we look and we see that on the reservations that the suicide rate is seven times the national average. And the sexual abuse rate, they say conservatively 8 out of 10 people on the reservations have been sexually abused. And I'd say the number's a little higher than that. The hopelessness, the addictions, the alcoholism, all of these things are cause and effect of these boarding schools in the way that we suffered through all these last 100+ years, right? But when most people look at us now, they say, well, they don't understand. They think we're all rich because of the casinos, which is not accurate at all. Very few of the tribes actually have casinos or making any amount of money. And they just think we're a bunch of drunk Indians. And we see that. The reality of it is on the Pine Ridge Reservation, the third poorest county in the country, the Pine Ridge Reservation does not sell alcohol. But if you cross off the reservation into a little town called White Clay, Nebraska, population of 12 people, has 4 liquor stores. They sell the equivalent of about 5 million cans of beer a year. And many of these beers are like strawberry flavored beer, watermelon flavored alcohol, all of these things like that. Who are they targeting with this fruity alcohol? They're targeting the kids. And they're having great success with it. And a few people are making lots of money, but it's destroying lots of lives. But that's the reality of our Native people today. I will say this. As my wife and I and the kids, as we travel every summer to reservations and we walk with people through their addictions, through their suicides, their challenges, all these things, we walk with them through these things. And throughout the year, in spite of the poverty, the 85% unemployment, in spite of the lack of stuff that we have here in Williamson County, it's some of the most joyful, happy people. In spite of the addictions, in spite of the hurts, there's a joy amongst the people. There's a humor that is just infectious. So some of the greatest times we have is when we're in these very, very poor areas. And some of you maybe have traveled the world, seen some of these places. It's interesting that some of those poverty-stricken areas in the world that I've been in, I seem to find the greatest joy, or people with the greatest joy. And it's that way with our Native people too. And so we have a time of year right now where we celebrate this, again, Wubba Wubba time. There was some pilgrims and some Indians that had a big picnic together, right? And we all shared apple pie and all, turkey and dressing and all of these things. That's what we celebrate. Many people ask me, well, do you guys even celebrate Thanksgiving? I say, I celebrate every chance I get to eat turkey and dressing. Every time. I don't care what day of the year it is. I've got a unique opportunity, and next week I'm going to the Vatican. Me and a few others having a meeting with Pope Francis, and I'm excited about that. But I'm going to be missing Thanksgiving. And that's such a precious time with my wife and kids, our families. We get together and we eat and just celebrate life. But I'm here to tell you the Thanksgiving that we recognize and we celebrate and we have a big parade about and all of these things, there's very little truth to that. Almost none, actually. And I'm not taking away from celebrating it. I'm all about celebrating it. I thought that was me. Because my rings just like that, and it's not unlike me to have but so the Thanksgiving that we celebrate now, I don't want to discourage anybody from celebrating, because that is not, anytime we get family together for any reason to celebrate and to eat and to have fellowship and bring in outsiders into our homes, anytime we can do that, we should. Whether it's in November or whether it's in February, whenever we have opportunity to do that. But that which we know of as Thanksgiving today is not accurate. See, because what most people don't realize, that historically there are at least 8 Thanksgiving proclamations prior to the 1621 account. 8 of them. In 1541, there's one, there's a Thanksgiving Mass. It was actually called a Thanksgiving Mass near the Paladero Canyon in Texas. It was to mark the finding of food and shelter for Francisco Vasquez de Coronado's expedition. So they found food, shelter. They declared this is a day of Thanksgiving. There's another one in 1564 in Jacksonville, Florida. There's another one in St. Augustine, Florida in 1565. 1598 down in San Elizario, Texas. 1607 up in Maine. 1610 in Jamestown, Virginia. And they were there. There was a Thanksgiving service held after the arrival of ships that were bringing supplies that they needed. 1619 in Virginia. 1620, They had a Thanksgiving service for the safe arrival of the Mayflower and when the Mayflower arrived. You see, there's this common theme there up to that point of having a time of Thanksgiving or celebrating upon the arrival of goods, of foods, of shelter, things like this. And then we have the 1621 big picnic, as we like to call it, when the English colonists and celebrated with the Wampanoags, and then it goes on to talk about many other celebrations after that, Thanksgiving proclamations after that. But uniquely absent from the history books is that it's about 15 years after that 1621 account, William Bradford, who was the leader, I guess you could call, of that original Thanksgiving that we celebrate, had his men massacre the Wampanoags, the same people who 15 years earlier they had a big picnic with. 15 years later, he has them all slaughtered. They forgot that in the history books. And it's supposed there are about 700 of them at that time. And then as you go throughout history, though, after that, there are lots of Thanksgiving Day celebrations. Various times of the year. Although after that, most of the celebrations were marked by victories in battle. And it was held by this particular town or after this particular battle, different places throughout America. In fact, there was, let's see, I'm trying to remember. I'll get to that in just a minute. But so you got this history of celebrations going on to mark a Thanksgiving. All pertain to battles, victories primarily. But the difference was with the tribal people, and what we know is that originally 1621 version is that the Wampanoags and the tribes of that area really had about 5 celebrations a year. 5 harvest celebrations a year based around when they would bring in the harvest, the foods, the crops they were raising. So they had these celebrations throughout the year, and as many believe that original Thanksgiving, 1621 version, may have been based around the Wampanoags' harvest. And it just kind of coincided at the same time with the Pilgrims, and they kind of put them together. Lots of different theories on all of that. But it's interesting. It's interesting that as you jump ahead, say to 1970, when the Massachusetts Department of Commerce decided they wanted to have this special big 350-year anniversary of that original Thanksgiving. They wanted Wampanoag representation, but they required the person who they selected to speak on behalf of the Wampanoags, they required them to submit their speech of what he wanted to say. And when he did and they read what he wanted to say, they decided, we don't need him up here speaking, and so they didn't allow him on the stage. Because sometimes people don't want to hear the truth, or they don't want to hear somebody else's version of the truth. Right? We get that. That happens. But if we go back, so let's go back to all these celebrations. Again, most of them had to do with recognizing, giving thanks for a victory in battle. And I want to read one thing for you here. And so what I'm going to read to you is actually an article that I wrote. It's a short little piece. But so the true history of Thanksgiving is not found in the books most of us studied in school. In fact, the story of the picnic between the Pilgrims and the Wampanoags came along as an afterthought nearly 280 years after it occurred. You see, after that original time, it was not even mentioned. But a guy who was an assistant to Bradford's happened to write about it in his diary. And I think it was like 50 years later or 30 years later it actually came out, or when he wrote it. But it wasn't until many years later that we'll mention here that they actually acknowledged it. That even acknowledged that 1621 account. It's not like it was such a big event that, hey, let's celebrate this every year, right? That's not what it was at all. And so it was an afterthought. And so even then, because his mention of it was merely a paragraph of what happened on this day. One small paragraph that we made a national holiday out of. And this guy's name was Edward Winslow. So the idea of having a day giving thanks to was not new to Pilgrims, nor was it to the tribal people of the New World, because along with the Pilgrims having different celebrations throughout the year, so did the native people, as I mentioned earlier. I wrote here that many tribes had feasts to celebrate harvest throughout the year. In fact, this one guy, Robert McKenzie, writes in his book, The First Thanksgiving, and he did a lot of research on this. He said there were 223 colonial or state Thanksgiving proclamations between 1676 and 1840. So in that 170-year span, he found 223 different Thanksgiving Day proclamations. But the interesting thing about all of these Thanksgiving Day proclamations that they had all up through history, it was not until 1897 that the idea of the Pilgrims having this meal with the Wampanoags, with the tribal people, was ever even mentioned. 1897. The first painting of the drawing of that initial Thanksgiving, I think, was in 1912 or 1914. So this idea of this Thanksgiving that we've been celebrating since 1621 is, there's no accuracy to it at all. Again, not taking away from the enjoyment of eating turkey and dressing with everybody, but what we're celebrating is an idea, not an actual event. And I really don't have a problem with that part of it. But to even get to how we have our current Thanksgiving, so starting back it said it wasn't until 1841 that the first publication came out that mentioned Edward Winslow's account of what happened. Somebody's doing some research, they came across this guy's writings from 200 and some, almost 300 years earlier. They go, wait a second, they had a big picnic down there. Some folks brought some deer, some birds, so that wasn't until a publication in 1841 that mentioned that. But it was a magazine editor, Sarah Josepha Hale. And guys, wouldn't you know it, is a woman who began a national movement. So this is a woman who was an editor of this newspaper, or a publication, a magazine. And she began to see this divide in the country. This is pre-Civil War. And she began to write letters to governors, to the presidents. She began to reach out to everybody she could to say, we need to unite. We need to have a national day of giving thanks, a Thanksgiving Day. And a couple of these little towns and stuff were having them, and they've got some letters. They had responded back to her, thank you, great idea, this is what we're going to do. But it wasn't until 1863 when she finally got a letter, and some believe an audience with President Abraham Lincoln, who obviously in the middle of the Civil War, recognized this great divide and was thinking, how can we pull the people together? See, there's a lot of resistance up to that time when Abraham Lincoln passed this and made this Thanksgiving proclamation, because people like to get up in the semantics of it. No, how dare the government pass this thing and say everybody's got to be thankful? That's the states' right. States should pass that if they want to. And so some pushed back on it, some rejected it, some accepted it. But it was this woman's letter writing campaign that got to Abraham Lincoln, that got that proclamation. Now, George Washington had a proclamation. When was his? His was in, George Washington's was a few years earlier. I say a few as in 1777. But his Thanksgiving, again, it was a day of celebration in honor of the defeat of the British at Saratoga. But it's October 3rd, 1863 is when Abraham Lincoln declared his. But that only happened for a couple of years and then kind of began to fall apart. Again, different people trying to celebrate it, trying to make it a national holiday, but there's a bunch of pushback on it. 1920, the Gimbel Brothers department store sponsored the first Thanksgiving Day parade in Philadelphia. And then 1924, the Macy's Thanksgiving Day parade was in New York City. But it was 1939 when President Franklin D. Roosevelt, they'd already declared it, and this always cracks me up too, because I'm thinking they moved it to the third Thursday in November. And then they began to have these issues on, well, some Novembers have 5 Thursdays, some don't. So they began to try and move it back. You know why? To give more shopping days before Christmas. Well, now that was during the Depression era, so they're just trying to encourage more spending. But I'm thinking, so you're determining a national holiday based on how much more money people will spend. Well, that's kind of America, I guess, right? But there's such pushback on that. It was 1941 when they officially made it the fourth Thursday in November. And so we've got this amazing story that we celebrate today of people coming together to share a meal. We've got this great story of people from different nationalities and origins all kind of coming together. And while I would love for it to be one of, I like it to be one of those fairy tales that has a happy ending, but we haven't seen the ending yet. So fortunately for us, we're still a part of that story. We still have the ability to affect the outcome of this fairy tale. But I think as a society, we need to be honest. We need to be honest about what happened. Not passing judgment on these people. Not passing judgment on George Washington, or I may pass a little judgment on Andrew Jackson, but that's just my own personal preference. Not passing judgment on what if they were doing what they thought was best for the country or for themselves. But at the very least, we need to be open and honest about what happened. Hear this person's truth and this person's truth. Lay it all out there and let people decide. But we've got to educate the children on it. We've got to teach the kids these things. Because for us old timers, It's not too late, but it's getting close. So we've got to educate the kids. You know, as we've traveled around to different places and teach on Native culture, one of the things I enjoy doing, if you get a chance to look through some of the items on the table over here, you'll see a lot of different types of flutes from different tribes. You'll see some different games, different tribal drums, baskets, all these different things we try and collect from various areas we go to. Because there's a great similarity in all these things. You take these drums, for instance. Now, these are Native American drums, but you can look around the world and people created drums out of animal hides all over the world. Flutes, different types of instruments, very similar around the world. And there was never a how to make a drum manual that was being carved out on stone back, 7 million years ago and passing it around to all the people so everybody can learn how to do it. But it's just part of the creative nature of humans. One of the things I got just this last year is a comb. I got this comb when I was up in Alaska by an Inuit guy. It's made of walrus tusk. And it had washed up on the beach. You can come take a look at it. It's warm because you can see it's still got the little pebbles that had embedded themselves between the teeth of it. This is about 700 years old. Long before DuPont started manufacturing combs and selling them here in the United States. But again, all of our people around the world, there's a commonality in who we are and what we do and things we want and desire for each other. Happiness, we want to be well fed, we want to be secure, we want to feel safe, we want our kids to be taken care of. Every people group in the world have these same desires, these same passions. So this year as we go into Thanksgiving, I want to encourage you guys to reach out to somebody, a neighbor. Ideally, somebody who's not quite like you. Maybe they're from a different socioeconomic level. Maybe they're a different race, a different religion. Maybe they're new to the United States. Maybe they're new to Tennessee. Find somebody and invite them into your home during this time of Thanksgiving. We've already established that the 1621 version of Thanksgiving is not accurate, but the spirit of it is. And that spirit is what we celebrate this season. And so I'm going to have my daughters, two of them come up, Leah and Nanai, and they're going to share a dance with you guys. And now, this particular dance is one, what's that? Okay. Is what we call a fancy shawl dance. And now you'll see as they dance around and the beautiful beadwork they're wearing and the shawls, all the colors, it's just fantastic. And so this kind of dance is almost a newness of life type dance. And it's our goal is that every day we wake up, we start life brand new every single day. We can't control what happened yesterday or last week. We can control today and this moment. Do we have that, your box, your music box? Yes, there it is. I was the last person. And I still have it.
Okay, great.
So we're going to share this.
Hey!
Thank you, ladies. And so, Passport to the World, thank you for inviting us to be a part of this. And welcome to our world. Welcome to Native America. Thank you, guys. We'll be around, happy to answer questions, be with Miss Pearl, my dear, dear friend. Always a joy and a blessing to be with you. So thank you guys so much. Thank you so much, Sarah.